Okay, we have a lot to get to today, so I don't want to hold this up too much. Welcome, everyone. I am going to get going with these sessions because we have great stuff. So you are in the Create and Connect Ignite talk. This is session 2. As it says on the screen, I'm Maren Vernon. I'm a Scratch Learning Resource Designer. And today I have the pleasure of bringing you talks from around the globe on 4 topics. We'll be hearing about Scratch and a food drive, 5th graders thinking beyond the box, breaking barriers, creative collaboration in under-resourced schools, experience the joy of creative coding with Scratch, and exploring water and Scratch as materials for experiential learning. As you are listening to these talk recordings, please feel free to jot down your questions. And then after these 4 recordings have played, we'll have about 20 to 30 minutes for a Q&A session with the presenters who are able to join us live. And if I recall correctly, I think all of our presenters today will be live with us after the recordings. Just add your questions to the chat. We'll try to get to as many as we can. And with that, let's hear from our presenters.
Hello, everybody. I'm Deanna Bledsoe. I'm the founder of Kai Coders. It's an organization where we teach elementary school kids how to code. And today I'm so excited to talk to you about this really cool and fun project. And believe it or not, we coded a food drive. So this is my presentation about how 5th graders thought beyond the box. I have been a computer programmer for over 25 years, and I founded Kai Coders back in 2020. And the one really cool thing that I like to do, other than finding coding concepts kind of out in the wild, out in the real world, is to figure out ways to bring coding into our physical world, to get it off of that screen and into something tangible. So today I'm just real quick going to talk about 3 different things. This concept that I call physical scratching. I'm going to talk about our Cangineering project and then the impact of that project. So physical scratching, what do I mean when I say that? It's kind of a weird word. You might think, you got an itch or something like that. But what I mean by that is moving code off the screen, beyond the tech lab, and outside of traditional STEM subjects. So I love taking the digital world into the physical world and creating a truly hands-on immersive experience where kids get to design and create interactive objects where we're learning about different subjects, all while coding. So we get that interdisciplinary learning while we're making personally meaningful projects. In this particular project, we used a tool called Makey Makey. So we did our scratching with Makey Makey. And really what Makey Makey is, it's a circuit board that's used as a keyboard replacement. So it's plug and play, you plug it into your USB and you turn everyday objects into a computer interface. So here's a really quick one for you, using Scratch and Makey Makey for some hands-on fun. On the left side here, you see that we have some really basic Scratch code. So they're just simple events. When the left arrow is pressed, it plays the C chord on the piano. When the right arrow is pressed, it plays the D chord on the piano, and so forth. But with Makey Makey, we can take these clementines in this example on the picture on the right, and we wire it up to the Makey Makey. So now when I hit certain clementines, it's hooked up to the left arrow event, and now my clementines are playing the piano. So that's kind of a really basic one. But from that basic project, we learn how to do more advanced projects. So in this example, Cangineering. So imagine my delight when I get an email from the Food Bank of Delaware that says, do you know a student, a teacher, a school administrator? Help us get the word out. We're bringing Cangineering to students. And this had formerly been a competition that was only open for adults, and usually businesses would take it on. But what it is in a 5-week period, you determine a structure and design a theme that you are going to build from the donated cans and boxes of food. You promote and run a food drive, and then you build the structure. And that's the traditional Cangineering model. And some of the examples that we saw, the kids saw, were things like this, where somebody built a truck out of, looks like a bunch of green vegetable cans and Cheerios for the back part of the truck, and even some water bottles for the windows. Or something like this, looks like this was done by Fujifilm. It's, it's a paintbrush, and they used multicolored cans to create that structure. But of course, I'm always trying to figure out, how can I bring the code off the screen? How can I make that interactive? And so what we decided is, let's do an interactive Cangineering structure. Kids are going to learn about conductivity. They're going to research the food bank. They're going to hook different interactive touch points. So think back to those oranges, different interactive touch points that would trigger events that the kids have coded. Of course, then you have to wire the whole structure, and then we're going to test, more test, because it's a lot of moving parts going on here. Our final project was this thing that the kids themed Stomp Out Hunger. It was a huge 8-foot long, probably 3 feet wide, and at the very back end where the high top is, of the sneaker is about 4 feet tall. So they took this idea of a Converse and made it into a canvas, and it's kind of hard to see here. This is a little video you can click on later if you want to see how that whole project played out. It's less than 2 minutes, but you can almost see here these wires running on the floor. There's interactive touch points on this structure. You know, I talked before about interdisciplinary learning. The kids learn circuitry, conductivity, coding, even structural engineering. You know, how many cans high can you go before they really start to tip over? And this was a really cool project because the kids got to run and manage a long-term project. You know, this was 5th graders. They don't have a whole lot of long-term projects at that age. A lot of homework, but not necessarily long-term projects. But most importantly, we donated over 1,000 pounds of food to our local food bank. And I will tell you that this structure won the most creative. Of course, I don't want to miss out on any of the so-called soft skills that the kids learn. You know, just even understanding what the food bank does in our community, how to plan an event, building social awareness. Most of our kids had not heard of the term food insecurity before. They know a lot about food insecurity now. Building that empathy, relationship building through the project, and of course, leadership skills. With that, that's the end of my presentation. I welcome your questions and feedback. Thank you, and have a great day.
Okay, so my name is Musumba Jacob Brian. I work with IREX under the K-Play program based out in the coastal city of Mombasa, but we currently support 100 schools, 50 schools in Kilifi and 50 schools in Kwale County. These are 2 of the most underserved counties in Kenya, and the program aims at supporting them in the LEGO initiative towards integrating playful learning with technology in the classrooms. We get to introduce teachers to creative coding using Scratch, and in this training academy, the way we go about it is to try and introduce the basic coding concepts of parallelism, conditionals, and others. So the K-Play program provides 1 laptop per school, and this laptop is to be used for collaborative learning with the teachers and learners. And this is why we sat down and thought about how can we introduce coding concepts in such a way that teachers and learners are able to experience them and attain digital literacy, which is advocated for in Kenya's CBC competency-based curriculum. So we came up with activities such as dance sequencing, which sort of takes them through the basic coding concept of sequences. We also decided to do a mirror drawing activity with the teachers to introduce the coding concept of parallelism. We introduced looping music, partner maze, and operating data to introduce the teachers to the coding concepts of loops, conditionals, and operators as well. We have a dance sequence activity where we have a teacher create a dice, and then learners can use this dice to choreograph certain dance activities. And this introduces them to the coding principle of sequences, where they get to see how you start from one point and then you get to the other. Then the learners now get to share their dance moves. And what the teachers then do is to ensure that they have to connect this to what they learn. Because you are advocating for learning through play with technology, the learners get to share some of their experiences when they are engaged in these activities. We also have an activity called the mirror drawing activity. The teacher then asks the learners to use materials that they have in their own environment, and this might be the pencils they use, their workbooks, and the teacher then asks the learners to take maybe 2 pencils and stick them together using masking tape, And then after that, the teacher asks the learners to get to draw some patterns. It might be shapes, it might be a pattern based on what the learner is interested in. And after the learners get to do this, they have to connect this with what happens on the Scratch platform, where they get to talk about the concept of parallelism, illustrating the same thing happening multiple times and simultaneously. So that ensures that the learners are now able to connect this. And after after the teacher has taken learners through some of these concepts, so what happens is we as Kplay go to the schools and we install Scratch in some of these tablets provided for the schools to allow or to enable the teacher get to interact, or to enable the teacher get to have the learners work on the devices they have been provided with. We've seen learners get to interact more with technology. We've seen that interest peaked. And when we do our lesson observations in the schools, you get to see that learners are really now interested in digital learning. We are seeing a lot of gains when it comes to retention of knowledge. We are seeing that learners are gaining the STEM and soft skills as a result of us introducing creative coding using unplugged activities. And this is one of the wins I can say the project has had. We also work with special schools, that is special and integrated schools in Kwale and Kilifi, so that that component of inclusivity, so that they also get to experience what digital learning looks like, even using unplugged activities. So thank you all for listening, and bye.
大輔倉本、project researcher in the University of Tokyo. Today, I will talk about practicing creative coding in Scratch. This idea revolves around engaging in visual design and generative art using Scratch. Creative coding is a popular hashtag often used by processing users, where numerous visually oriented creative works are shared. Here, I would like to introduce the work of Nejio-san, a creative coder from Japan. One of their creations is titled Ajisai Hydrangea, with generated using P5JS. Why creative coding? I'm personally very interested in Scratch as a creative learning environment. However, you may wonder why you should engage in creative coding. Scratch is known for its low-floor, wide walls approach. It's designed to accessible to anyone and allow for a wide range of projects. While this generally seen as a positive aspect, some people may perceive it as being only for children or consider it somewhat simplistic. It can be challenging to convey the idea of a high ceiling in Scratch, where more advanced and complex projects can be created. Additionally, there is a constraint in the size of the stage in Scratch. Let's take a look at the characters of creative coding primarily with processing. To create code, you need typing skill and knowledge of syntax and grammar. However, it's widely practiced in the field visual design and art. In addition, the canvas, which corresponds to the stage in Scratch, can be specified to any size using code, allowing the flexible output sizes. In summarize in this table, what happens when you engage in creative coding with Scratch? Firstly, it's great to have an environment where any can easily practice. Next, Creative coding emphasizes visual elements in the creators. This appeals older learners and provides a theme that can be enjoyed by individual or any gender. Thirdly, when using Scratch, there is a constraint on the stage size, but later I will introduce a method by which you can bypass this constraint. First, let's explore many projects with the creative coding hashtag. Next, let's get an overview of what kind of projects are available. Finally, let's create your own creative coding project. It's okay to start by remixing someone else's work, and don't forget to keep it casual and enjoyable. That's because one of the creative coders, Takao-san, once said, so his code flows like a humming. It's take it easy. And let's not forget, I will introduce some tips for creative project in Scratch. First, use vector-based costumes. Second, using the clone functions. And display or capture your project on high-resolution displays. Finally, I will share an example of my own practices. Practice 1, Visual Code Studio. It's making on the Scratch My Studio. Next one is Visual T-shirts on Scratch Day. I had a workshop on Scratch Day in Tokyo. It's using UV printers and printing on T-shirts. Next step, I'm considering creating beginner's guide for the creative coders with Scratch and some materials for the learners. Is that all? Thank you.
My name is Vanya or Lavanya. I work at in different school settings. I create learning experiences for undergraduate college students. I work at Shrishti's Manipal Institute of Art, Design and Technology. I live in Bangalore, South India, and I facilitate undergraduate students to designing experiences for school learners. I'll be working with teachers of different subjects to encourage them to use Scratch as a material. So it's to encourage children to tell stories, describe experiences, and express their understanding by using Scratch. Exploring water and Scratch as a material for experiential learning. I invite everyone to think of the context and prompts that relate to the school curriculum. In this presentation, I will be looking at water. I would like everyone to think of how to encourage teachers of all subjects so that they can encourage learners to imagine, create, and share with Scratch. Scratch is more than a programming language. It's a material that can be used in the classroom. I chose water as a context since it was a broad subject. Everyone can relate to water in reference to daily life, clean water, polluted water. There are references in the school curriculum as well, directly and indirectly. Water is a context. Here I will describe two types of projects. One project where I give prompts to Shrishti undergraduate students so that they explore water in Scratch, and another set of projects that Shrishti students created for school students. The prompt I gave in the beginning was to think about water, write down words, and then make with Scratch. I also introduced Scratch and suggested some blocks of code that they could use to explore. Here is what one student did. She created a wave with fish moving around. Here is another example of a student's work. Here she used the idea of whirl in the waterfall. Another prompt was to create a story about water. This student took photos of a starfish and seaweeds. She also drew some simple shapes with eyes that made an animation. The student made drawings and uploaded them as sprites and placed them at different layers. She also used paint. This student grew up in Varanasi and decided to give information about the river Ganga. She used photographs and animated some birds and fish and added text as sprites. This student chose to animate and give information on the cities that were submerged by water. Now we come to the next set of activities. Here, the Shristi students were asked to create activities for school-going children. It was not suggested that they made programs, but they all seemed to make a Scratch program and wanted students to remix it. This was interesting since there was a short time frame and the students managed to actually get children to code. One student created a background and asked children to draw pictures and make them into sprites and use Scratch to move the sprites around the scenery she had created. These students created a flow and a maze and got students to direct the sprites along the path with the blocks of code. One condition that was given was that the children needed to snap the blocks together and run it automatically. So with one click, everything had to happen. They could make a number of different variations. So they could use different keys and then the whole thing happened. This student created a program with a tiger in different backgrounds. Children were introduced to sound design and asked to record different sounds, both of the tiger as well as the backgrounds. This student used backgrounds and sprites. She chose the backgrounds and then she asked the children to choose the sprites to create a story. Some things worked and some things I needed to think about. Things that worked were drawing sprites and uploading them. Seemed to really work well. Time to share and talk and explain with a set of protocols for feedback. That's good. An open-ended prompt, especially when learners were more confident with Scratch, works well. Things that were sometimes a problem. Children found the idea of coordinates, the idea that they actually could experiment to learn by changing numbers and noticing patterns. On Scratch, you needed to plan activities, not just anything goes. As a facilitator, having a drawing component is important when designing computational activities. Sometimes electricity fails. Often we don't have enough computers in India. Let's all think about learning, teaching, exploring, and what to change when what we have planned. Okay, done. I would like to thank Srishti Undergraduate Foundation students for exploring water and Parikrama students for engaging in the activities. Thank you.
Oh man, that was all so inspiring. So many fun examples there. I will say I really love coding meeting the physical world. I can't resist a giant sneaker and those t-shirts. Totally stealing that. I love that idea. It was also really fun to see how those scratchers brought in their drawings. Like that always makes my heart sing into their projects. And then I thought it was that dice to dance was such a fun idea, whether you are, have limited computers, so you need to, encourage folks to do offline, or even if you have computers, it's just a really great way of getting people moving and engaging with the code. And so I think that's beautiful, for everyone to try. So really nice, you guys. I noticed that in your talks, you really touched on some kind of interdisciplinary connections. So science and coding, art and coding, movement and coding, civics and coding. Do you find that students are more engaged or that coding feels more tangible or approachable maybe when your coding activity is paired with a area or a discipline they already know something about? And anybody can take that one. I know I kind of went fast. Hopefully you can see the question in the bottom. But do you find that pairing of maybe a subject matter they're really interested in or passionate about, like art or, the exploration of things like water, helps them get into that coding piece a little bit easier?
I think it's really important not to kind of take it as coding, but to take it as a material that we use everywhere. And I think the idea of actually finding context where it's meaningful, like Diana's done with music, and it's really a nice way of actually taking it and making people do things.
Okay, maybe I can go next. So I think for us, we realize that using the 4 P's of creative learning, the peers, projects, passion, and play. So when you want learners to retain information and knowledge, you have to tap into their passions first to make it easier for them to retain that particular piece of knowledge. So when you're looking at the different learning areas in the Kenyan curriculum, we then try and see which area or which subject areas this learner passionate about. And then when a teacher is now preparing unplugged activities to introduce coding to these learners, we then use that particular learner interest to then make the activities so that it becomes very easier for the teachers to ensure learners are really getting to grasp the concepts.
Excellent points.
Aaron, I love that question because as soon as you can start getting kids doing things that are related to coding that they know about, or maybe they don't exactly know yet, the one thing I really like about doing that is if kids feel a little bit, nervous about doing coding, it's just another way. It's not, for example, the project that we did with the huge sneaker, it wasn't a whole ton of coding. It was a lot of everything. And so even if you weren't good at it, it wasn't the only thing. So there were plenty of things to be good at, and you learned along with the other kids how to also get good at coding while integrating it into this bigger project. So that's what I like about it. And it's, it's more real world. You see technology embedded in all kinds of things. It's not just this thing that's over here and then, art and everything else is over there. Everything is also integrated now. So it was a really good way for them to see like, oh, how do I integrate it? This is cool. Like some of the kids already had been doing Scratch and could do games and could do different things. But then how do you get that off the screen into something else? So I think getting as many different ways to get the code into different things is just, it like checks every box, I think.
Okay, my turn. So try to create something with coding or Scratch is very enjoyable things for many younger person to elderly person. So it's so fun for me.
Yeah, I love that you point out that it can really cross ages. And I find even as an adult, I can get really into making these Scratch projects, right? And I have so much fun myself. And so it's really fun, I think, when they can see your passion for it too. And I love also, we talk about often wide walls, low floors, high ceilings. Some of those art pieces can feel really high ceiling, but I think it's inspiring because I can start here and I have something in my mind I can work to, which is great. And I also loved your point, Deanna, about the collaboration opportunities. So if one student may be better about stacking cans, right, to make this sneaker, and another student's great at maybe, they have some familiarity with the coding already, you can have these paired experiences where they can help each other and then learn from each other, build on each other's strengths. And I love that piece of coming together. Once you've completed an activity, I'm curious, how do you lead your learners in reflection or gather constructive feedback, either about the activity you've presented or about their project? Because I think we all can learn from constructive feedback, right? Do you have some favorite tips or techniques to get your students to reflect on what they created and where they could go from there?
Mayor, maybe I'll just jump in real quick. One of the things that I love to do, because this is like a project, so we do these projects, these project-based learning. And if you've ever done any kind of project management, one of the things at the end that people like to forget to do is to reflect on what worked and what didn't work. And, you know, to me, it's the question to the kid is they actually have their own Kanban board. So they run their project. Here's your list of tasks that need to get done. Here they are getting done. And here's the final column, they're done. I asked them to go back and look at that board and say, if you had to do this again, what would you do differently? And so that's kind of a different way instead of saying what worked and what didn't work. Eventually, everything kind of worked. They figured out how to make it all work when the judges showed up, you know, and when they came to collect those cans. But of course, we had a lot of failures. I mean, cans fell over and then wires got crisscrossed and all the events were firing at the same time. And it was just like this loud cacophony of like, why are all the events firing right now? And you could hear all the audio events that had been triggered. So in the end, it all ended up working out. But just like with any project that you have at work or at home, you know, there's little bumps along the way. And so I think just asking it in that way, saying, you know, if we were going to do this again, what would we do? What would we do differently? What would our approach be? Would we eliminate anything? Would we add things? Would we just change things? So I think just asking them those questions, and then they can even look at that board and see all the different tasks, right? Did we have to do all of those tasks? Should we have done some of those tasks first? Or, you know, could we have planned better? So just like overall, if you just that generic question, if we were going to do it again, how would we do it differently? Sometimes that's enough for them to start thinking, oh yeah, maybe. And then maybe next year we'll do it again too. We'll do the engineering again.
I can build on what Deanna mentioned. So I think your question sort of connects to what we also like to introduce, the creative learning spiral, where they get to imagine, create, and then they get to reflect after they have shared. So for us, the unplugged activities connect to the plugged activities. So after learners have done the unplugged activities, then when they're now reflecting, we then introduce the devices, the tablets they have in the school, and get them to code the specific concepts now in the tablets. And then we then pose the question, how did you solve this challenge? Maybe you wanted your sprite to move from point A to point B. How did you solve that? So you'll find learners reflecting, but they're reflecting based on the unplugged activities that they did. So a learner would say, oh, just like we danced, we moved from point A to point B. So when I wanted to code, I now thought, oh, I want to move myself from point A to point B and then C. So it sort of connects the whole idea around how they learned the concept.
Really excellent.
I love the way that Brian has used dance and coding in dance and then actually done it in Scratch. I often do it with drawings. And I find it important that children, at least in the beginning, kind of plan what they do. So they've got all their drawings all over the place, and then they begin thinking of what do I want to do on Scratch? And it's like move this character from here to there. And in a little sketch, they kind of have this big dot, little dots. And so they've got it sort of planned. And then they start. And as a teacher, that becomes a very important thing so that I can have a meaningful conversation. Hey, you were thinking of this, but you're doing something else. It's nice, but you want to also do this one. And so I can have a conversation because I can actually see what they were imagining and it's on paper and then it's whatever. The other way that we reflect is actually to pause the class and we kind of say that you never can finish a project. It's not a finished project, but it's a thing in progress. Now let's share. And then the students have to actually go to each table, or if it's a big class, then they're made into groups of at least 6 people. So they can see at least 5 different projects. And then we get them to write, because if they speak all the time goes. And we get them to write comments about what they found inspiring or what they learned in specific code. And then how could they use what they've learned in their projects? also the idea that maybe I could comment on the person and say, could you also add? So there's this kind of thing of actually learning from each other, suggesting, and when they share it, they're not just supposed to share the final full screen, but they actually have to explain the code to each other, which means that they're actually teaching each other. And there's always this thing that you can ask as many questions as you like until you've understood it, and then you move on.
I love that point that projects are never done. We're always tinkering.
So, in my case, なんだ。I'm telling the student for the reflecting in themselves. So his their individual projects. So each other.
I love this idea of just getting this practice giving helpful feedback, giving constructive feedback, and overcoming potential frustrations, right? Working together to overcome frustrations, because I think it's really nice when you can ask a fellow classmate. Sometimes they don't always feel like they have to come to the facilitator or the adult in charge of the activity. This idea that they can also rely on each other, and this idea of talking your buddy through your code is really fun. And I think that's one of the great aspects of Scratch, that ability to see behind, right? So you can break down someone else's code, and there's the ability to leave comments if you feel like people might need help understanding what you did. And I find as I'm teaching others, I learn something myself. And so it's great for both parties, right? I'm just looking to see in the chat if there are any questions at the moment. So feel free if you have questions to put them in the chat. Let's see. I'm seeing one here. Presentation. Let me think of learning framework that we use in the Science Museum in Milan called Future Innovators. Linking STEM and artistic learning. Let's see. Engaging facilitator tools. Sorry, I'm just reading through here. Yes. Yeah. I think, like I heard the 4 Ps mentioned while you all were chatting. I heard the creative learning spiral mentioned. And this idea about how to facilitate, introduce the tools and engage. Really, really good points in the side. I think we can all relate to that. One of the other questions that this sort of brings up for me is, have you ever had, as you're working with students, something unexpected happen and we need to quickly pivot, or maybe our project changes? I'm curious, has something like that happened? Did it influence how you proceeded? How do you address those sort of unexpected things coming up? For instance, I see somebody saying, I want to know more about CAN engineering. You mentioned like everything was firing at once at one point, and you're trying to break down and so you all of a sudden got this maybe overwhelming big problem of everything's going on at once. Do you have, some ways that you lead learners through navigating, kind of dealing with that?
Yeah, I love when there's problems, because that's the best time to learn things, honestly. It's frustrating, and then sometimes, the kids are like, but really, I was a professional developer for over 20 years, and whenever there's problems, they're all fixable. You just have to find out, like, what is the hardest part is finding out, like, what is the problem. So in that example where all the events were firing all at the same time, they had looked from a design standpoint and saw all the wires running on the outside of this sneaker and said, that's ugly. We don't want anybody to see the wires. We don't want them to know how it's working. They put all the wires inside the structure, which was filled with cans and other stuff. And so they had not really, the connectivity points for these alligator clips were not protected. They were not insulated. And so as soon as they started hitting those cans, bam, connections were being made that they didn't want to be made. And so that really was like, unwire it. Let's just start with the first event. Unwire the whole thing, disconnect it from our Makey Makey, right? And let's just start with the very first event. Let's get that one working. Is that working? Only when you want it to work, right? The event should only get triggered when you want it to work. And so that one worked. Great. Let's do the second one. Now you did the second one, it works, but try it now also with the first one. Make sure they're both still working and you didn't accidentally break the first one. And so that went on. I think we had 5 different events. So they did that. And it was a lesson for them, a couple things. Yeah. Okay. So we learned more about circuitry because, when we tested circuitry, we did it in the perfect situation when everything was connected and everything worked when we wanted it to work. We didn't think about, the alligator clips are left exposed and we just let them fall on a bunch of metal cans. So like I said, I love it when problems happen because that to them, they understood circuitry then. They understood it more when the problem happened. The same with the code. They understood it more like, why are all these events firing? When you have to break everything down and figure out what is the problem. Oh, it's such a great learning opportunity. I love it. The kids, when they were done, they don't love it when it's happening, right? Nobody loves a problem when it's happening. But such a sense of accomplishment when they're like, yeah, we figured it out. Yeah, it works. We're just going to also just show the wires. It's okay. From a design standpoint, we want to make sure that it works. So, yeah.
Anyone else had something unexpected happen? Maybe even just a lesson you planned, you thought was going to go one way and then went a completely different way? Had any experiences like that?
Maybe.
Yeah.
It's always up to them. So I don't forget, don't be married with curriculum. It said Karen Brennan. I know the word, so.
Don't be married to the curriculum. Be flexible. Perfect.
Sure.
Yeah. So it's so funny you brought that up. For me, I'm thinking about the teachers when they're with the learners, and we have really large enrollments in Kenya. So you can find a class has around 80 learners. So essentially, if a teacher, you're one teacher and you're teaching 80 learners, you're going to have to group them together and then they're sharing devices. So we try and tell the teachers to allow learners to express themselves creatively using Scratch. So if, say, for instance, you are teaching science and you want learners to stick to the specific piece that you're teaching in that particular lesson, you'll find that because learners are creative, maybe 2 or 3 groups in the classroom are doing something entirely different, but it's a full project and they have a basis for it. So we encourage teachers to be vulnerable and accept that learners really do learn how to code. And what you as a teacher can do is to be more of a facilitator of knowledge as opposed to trying to just ram the information into the heads. So teachers now are feeling more open. You bring the devices and then you tell the learners, okay, so today we're going to learn this. But then at the end of the day, you have 8 different projects in the groups. And it's really fun to see that because it tells you, okay, learners are now being imaginative. They're expressing themselves more when they're using these devices. And I think it's one of the things you feel really proud when you walk into a classroom and you see. Yeah.
Love that.
So I think it's actually really fun. I really appreciate this fact that Deanna has taken this idea that actually in a project you can involve everything. And it's not that you have to actually choose a particular thing. Also, this idea that the curriculum is important, but that's not the most important. And I know that in a project that I did recently with kids, and we wanted to teach Scratch, we had this whole idea of water, the idea of flows, and then the electricity went. And and not for a day, for 3 days. And it was a 5-day work. And so the goal was to try and actually think about water, about maps. The goal also was to try and think about Scratch and the idea that you actually move it from one place to the other. And then you actually suddenly pause and rethink and kind of think about what is it that I actually wanted them to know in Scratch so that they can actually do it later easier. So we went all into coordinates, and we went into making more details. We went into thinking about what exactly we want to do. But this thing of actually using a problem as a pause to actually think about. So I wouldn't want another project with 3 days of no current, but I do definitely think of wanting to know what the physical things that I can do, as well as the digital things or computational ones, and then trying to kind of work it out. Yeah, we also have
I
this.
love that. That's like the ultimate pivot. That's amazing. But we often will see like, it's that, oh my gosh, like the internet just went out, or all of a sudden my school blocked something, or something else weird happened, and how do you pivot? How do you adjust? And I like that idea of, okay, what kind of computational concepts might we be teaching, or what connections are we making, and how can we quickly utilize that in another way, or even seeing like the code blocks in the presentation that were cut out and then could be put together. Like, I get a little crazy with my 3D printers sometimes, and I've made physical code blocks. There's something so fun about sometimes just being hands-on with the thing. And it also sort of sometimes sets it in my mind in a different way. If I am physically, touching or moving things, or sort of physically walking through the steps, right? As we teach them how to break down steps, sometimes it helps to sort of act it out. So I love this. I see a question in the chat that says, do you have a time limit for these creative projects? Are they designed to be done in a lesson? If they're longer, how do you keep them on track?
Okay, I'll respond to that one. So for our case, a normal lesson takes around 35 minutes, but we have what we call a play lab concept, where after the lessons, if learners feel like they want to continue working on their projects, they can do it, but during recess, maybe when they're breaking for tea, or during lunchtime or games time, when they're leaving the school, they can now access the play lab and use the devices to continue working on their projects. Now, the downside with that is learners, when they're close, when you give them access to the devices, they now do not want to go home. So as a teacher, you have to be there to tell them, okay, now we'll continue tomorrow. Let's wrap it up for the day. Yeah, but it's always so nice to see them getting to interact with them during recess.
I think designing for different time frames is an interesting challenge, and what you can do in different time frames is very different. I love the way my students, when they had a time frame of 45 minutes where they actually decided to do a remix. Whereas if you actually have 5 days, then you can actually do much more in-depth things. But that 45 minutes where the students actually thought, okay, what do I want to get the students to do? And this idea of actually taking sound as the part of code that they wanted to do. So she gave them those tiger pictures, and then she just explored the idea of actually sound and these different levels of sound. And the kids were coding because they had the pictures and they had to actually create the sounds themselves and then put them so that they actually worked. So kind of thinking of a context, whether it's a long time thing like the cans, where it most probably took a long time, or these tiny little chunks, and then kind of thinking, what do I really want to do, and how can I create a context that is meaningful? And yeah, what can I do next?
It looks like we're getting close to our time, but please continue to answer this question. But if anyone has additional questions, I just want to mention, throw them in the chat. We'll try to get to them. But please go for it.
I just quickly want to say, I think deadlines are important. you don't give kids or even grown-ups a deadline, then just things seem to linger. They never get done, right? So deadlines are important. With this Cangineering project, we had a deadline. We knew that the competition started on such and such a date, and we had 5 weeks, and that's to do the whole thing. So you have to collect the cans and figure everything out. And so, like I said earlier, with these projects, one of the things that I've learned just from working with kids, coaching kids, things like that, is I don't want them always coming up to me asking what to do. I'm done with this. What can I do next? That's why I have that. That's really selfishly I made them do the project board, because then I'm just like, just go look and see what has to get done. But the other tool that I use to help them is establishing a timeline. Like I said, a lot of fifth graders don't have long-term projects. They don't know how to work backwards and say, okay, this is the date it needs to get done. What are all the things we need to do? And when do all those little tasks need to get done, right? So it's like a building process. And so even having them manage their own timeline, and you look at the thing, you say, okay, guys, we said that by 2 weeks, we were supposed to have, the flyers out, and we were supposed to be doing our design, and we're going to start with the coding because we can do coding before we start building, right? And so are we on schedule? And that's it. I don't have to say we're not on schedule. Do you think we're on schedule? Do you think we'll get done on time? And then, so because sometimes too, there's the tendency, there are perfectionists that, no, I recorded my voice and I recorded a stomping sound and it wasn't the right sound. That's good enough sound. Like, how many times can you record a stomping sound? That's what's going on in my brain. Like, you don't need to record the stomping, but if you want to record, it's their decision. So if you want to keep recording the stomping sound, what else are you not going to get done today, right? So you kind of have to put that in their brain and think of it, like, just think about that. If you want to record, these classes were only 45 minutes long. So, you can only get so much done. And when I say 45 minutes, they come in, by the time they get ready, you're down to 40 minutes, really. So part of that is helping them learn how to manage their time. It really is. The bottom line is it's going to be done. It's not going to be done in what you imagined it, because no project really is usually done the way you first imagine it. It will be done in some format. And what that format looks like depends on how you can get your tasks done. So yeah, I love the deadlines, and I love making sure that the kids themselves keep themselves on task.
Those soft skills, man, they're important too.
They are.
Yeah. And my idea is, if I have a class for the 50 minutes, so when I explain them just 15 or 10 minutes, just 10 minutes, so they have enough time, so they can make something in the class.
Well, and I love this concept of sort of planning, right? Like, that definitely helps sometimes. If you sometimes I know I want to dive right into coding, right? Dive right into making something. But if I stop and I plan, then I know what sprites I might need or how they might interact. Can definitely have an effect on the process. And then leaving enough time for reflection at the end, something I'm sometimes also guilty of not doing well, right? So really great tips today. I think we're closing out the session here in just a sec, but thank you so much. I'm so glad you all were able to hear us live so we could get this great knowledge in addition to your recorded chats. And I hope you enjoy the rest of conference. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.